Imagine waking up on a Saturday morning in 1965, and the first thing you hear isn't an alarm on your phone, because there are no phones in bedrooms. Instead, it's the clattering of milk bottles on the doorstep, the distant hum of a Coleman's lorry, and the sound of your mom calling up the stairs that breakfast is ready. The house is cold, properly cold, the kind of cold that makes you dress under the blankets. There's a smell in the air, a mixture of coal smoke from the fire that hasn't been lit yet, toast from the kitchen, and that peculiar mustiness that every British home seemed to have before central heating became commonplace. This wasn't nostalgia back then, this was just life. And if you grew up in 1960s Britain, these moments, these sensations, they're burned into your memory like grooves in a vinyl record. Today, we're going to walk back through 20 memories that will transport you instantly to a decade that feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Number 20. The smell of carbolic soap in the school toilets. You remember that smell, don't you? That harsh, chemical, almost medicinal scent that hit you the moment you pushed open those heavy toilet doors. The soap was a pale yellow block sitting in a damp wooden dish, and it never quite lathered properly. You'd rub your hands together under the cold water, the only water available in most school washrooms, and you'd walk away with hands that were technically clean, but felt somehow rougher than before. That soap wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to disinfect, to scrub away germs with the same no-nonsense efficiency that characterized so much of post-war Britain. The toilets themselves were austere, often outdoors in the playground, with that distinctive smell of disinfectant mixed with damp brick and old plumbing. Today, school toilets have warm water, liquid soap dispensers, and hand dryers. Back then, you dried your hands on a single cloth towel that hung on a roller, damp and slightly grimy by mid-morning, used by every child in your class. The carbolic soap was part of a larger picture, a world where comfort took second place to practicality, where childhood wasn't cushioned or sanitized in the way we understand now. Number 19. Watching the test card on television while waiting for programs to start. Television in the 1960s didn't broadcast around the clock. It started mid-morning, broke for hours in the afternoon, and finished before midnight. And when there was nothing on, there was the test card. You'd sit there, sometimes for ages, staring at that static image of a girl with a blackboard and a clown doll, accompanied by that eerie, continuous tone. It sounds absurd now, doesn't it? Waiting for television to begin, but back then it was normal. You'd time your day around the schedule. Children's hour was sacred. A brief window in the late afternoon when programs like Blue Peter or The Flower Pot Men would flicker onto the black and white screen. Families would gather around the single television set, usually in the front room, and the act of watching was communal, deliberate, almost ceremonial. There was no flipping through hundreds of channels, no streaming on demand, no watching on your phone while you eat breakfast. Television was an event, and the test card was a reminder that broadcasting was a resource, not a given. Today we have content every second of every day, more than we could ever consume in a lifetime. Back then, you waited for the magic to begin, and somehow that waiting made it all the more special. Number 18. The taste of Corona Pop delivered by the Corona Man. There was a ritual to it. Every week, the Corona Man would arrive in his electric float, bottles clinking in their crates, and he'd collect the empties from the doorstep before leaving fresh ones. The bottles were thick glass, heavy, with labels that seemed permanently affixed, and the flavors were simple but electric on a child's tongue: cherryade, orangeade, limeade, dandelion, and burdock. You'd hear the fizz as your mom unscrewed the metal cap, the slight resistance before the seal broke, and then that first sip, sweet and sharp and utterly unlike anything you could buy in a shop today. The bottles were returned, washed, and refilled, a perfect closed loop long before anyone used terms like sustainability or environmental consciousness. It was just how things were done. The Corona man knew your family would exchange a few words with your mom, perhaps collect payment in coins counted out carefully. There was a personal connection, a thread that linked your household to the wider community. Today we buy fizzy drinks in plastic bottles from supermarkets, drink them once, and discard them. The taste is different, somehow flatter, more uniform. Back then, Corona Pop was a small luxury, a treat that arrived with a smile and left with a promise to return next week. Number 17, the absolute silence of Sundays. Sunday in 1960s, Britain was governed by unwritten laws that everyone seemed to follow. Shops were closed, pubs open for only a few hours. The streets were quieter, almost unnaturally so, as if the entire country had collectively agreed to slow down. In the morning, church bells rang, and families dressed in their Sunday best would walk to services, children in polished shoes and ironed clothes. The afternoon was for the Sunday roast, a meal that took hours to prepare and was eaten at the dining table, not in front of the television. After lunch, fathers might doze in their armchairs with the newspaper, while mothers washed up and children were sent outside to play, but quietly because making noise on a Sunday felt somehow transgressive. There was no DIY allowed, no mowing the lawn, no loud music. Even the radio seemed subdued, broadcasting light music or religious programming. It was a day that felt heavy with expectation, a day of rest that sometimes felt more like a day of boredom, especially if you were a child desperate for something, anything, to happen. Today, Sunday is just another day. Shops are open, people work, the noise never stops. Back then, that silence was both stifling and sacred, a reminder that some things, at least one day a week, were meant to stop. Number 16, the freezing cold bedrooms and the patterns of frost on the inside of your window. Central heating was rare in the 1960s. Most homes relied on a single coal fire in the living room, and the rest of the house was left to fend for itself against the British winter. Bedrooms were cold, achingly cold, the kind of cold that made your breath visible in the morning. You'd wake up and see intricate patterns of frost on the inside of your window, delicate ferns and spirals of ice that had formed overnight. Your bed was piled with blankets, heavy woolen things that pressed down on you, and you'd burrow underneath them, reluctant to face the shock of cold air when you finally had to get up. Getting dressed was an ordeal. You'd grab your clothes and run downstairs to dress by the fire, or you'd do that strange dance of pulling on layers while still half under the covers. There was no such thing as a warm bathroom. Washing your face in the morning meant icy water from the tap, a bracing start to the day that left your skin tingling. Hot water bottles were essential, filled from the kettle before bed and wrapped in a towel to keep your feet warm through the night. Today, we have thermostats and central heating and heated towel rails, and the idea of ice forming inside your bedroom window seems almost Dickensian. Back then, it was just winter and you got on with it, because what choice did you have? Number 15. Collecting Green Shield stamps at the petrol station and shops. Every purchase was an opportunity to collect Green Shield stamps, little perforated squares that came in sheets and were handed over by shopkeepers or petrol station attendants with a smile and a "Don't forget your stamps." You'd take them home and spend evenings carefully licking them, the taste slightly chemical and oddly satisfying, and pressing them into the little green books provided by the scheme. It was a family activity, this stamp collecting, and when you'd filled enough books, you could take them to the Green Shield Stamps catalog shop and exchange them for rewards. A toaster, perhaps, or a set of towels, or if you'd saved for ages, something truly special like a camera or a bicycle. There was something deeply satisfying about the process, the slow accumulation of value, the tangible sense of working towards something. It taught patience and saving in a way that modern loyalty points, invisible and digital, never quite managed to replicate. The catalog itself was a source of wonder, thick and glossy, and you'd pore over it, planning what you might save for next. Today, we get points on our credit cards, algorithms tracking our spending, rewards that appear and disappear in apps we rarely check. Back then, you could hold your savings in your hand, count them, feel the weight of them. The stamps were a promise, and fulfilling that promise felt like a genuine achievement. Number 14, the sound of the rag and bone man calling through the streets. Rag and bone! Any old iron! The call would echo down your street, and you'd hear it before you saw him, that distinctive sing-song shout that hadn't changed in decades. The rag and bone man came with his horse and cart, or sometimes a small van, and he'd buy or barter for anything you no longer wanted. Old clothes, scrap metal, broken furniture, even bones from Sunday's joint. It was recycling before recycling had a name, a system that had existed since Victorian times and still clung on in the 1960s. Children would rush out to see the horse, magnificent and patient, its hooves clopping on the pavement. Sometimes, if you were lucky, he'd give you a balloon or a goldfish in a plastic bag in exchange for your family's unwanted items. There was a romance to it, a sense of continuity with the past, this man making his living from what others threw away. Today we have council recycling bins and charity shops and car boot sales, but they're all scheduled, organized, sanitized. Back then, the rag and bone man was spontaneous, a wandering merchant of the discarded, and his call was as much a part of the street soundscape as children playing or dogs barking. Number 13, reading by torchlight under the covers after lights out. Bedtime was strictly enforced in most households. Lights out at a specific time, no negotiation. But if you were a reader, a dreamer, someone who couldn't bear to put down your book just because the clock said so, you'd wait until you heard your parents' footsteps retreat down the stairs, and then you'd pull out your torch from under your pillow. It was a small act of rebellion, reading by that narrow beam of light, the book inches from your face, every sound amplified in the quiet house. You'd read adventures, mysteries, the famous 5 or the secret 7, transported to worlds of midnight feasts and solving crimes, while your own little world consisted of staying awake just 10 more minutes, just one more chapter. The torch would grow dim as the batteries weakened, the light turning yellowish, and you'd shake it, willing it to last a little longer. Sometimes you'd fall asleep with the book still open, the torch still on, and wake hours later, cold and stiff, to switch it off before anyone noticed. Today, children have phones and tablets in their rooms, screens glowing at all hours, content unlimited and instantly available. Back then, that torchlight reading was precious precisely because it was forbidden, because it required planning and secrecy, because every page you turned was a small victory against the tyranny of bedtime. Number 12. The absolute authority of the park keeper. Public parks in the 1960s were patrolled by park keepers, men in uniforms with peaked caps who enforced the rules with an authority that seemed absolute and unquestionable. Keep off the grass when the sign said so. No ball games in certain areas. No running near the flower beds. No sitting on the park benches if you were a child. These weren't suggestions. They were commandments, and the park keeper was both judge and enforcer. He'd blow his whistle if you transgressed, and you'd freeze, genuinely frightened, because his disapproval carried weight. He might chase you off, might threaten to report you to your parents, might ban you from the park altogether, and the terrifying thing was, he could do all of that. Adults backed him up. If he said you were causing trouble, you were causing trouble, no questions asked. Parks were meant to be orderly, civilized spaces, and children were tolerated as long as they behaved. Today, park keepers, if they exist at all, are groundskeepers or maintenance staff, not authority figures. Children run freely, kick balls where they like, and the idea of a uniformed official chasing you for walking on the grass seems almost comically authoritarian. Back then, it was just how things were. Respect for authority, even the authority of a man whose job was tending flower beds, was ingrained from the moment you could walk. Number 11. The ritual of Saturday morning pictures at the ABC Minors. Saturday morning was cinema morning for thousands of British children, and the ABC Minors Club was an institution. You'd queue outside the cinema, clutching your sixpence or shilling, excited and noisy in a way that would never have been tolerated on a weekday. Inside, the cinema would be packed with children, hundreds of them, all singing the ABC Minors song before the film started. We are the boys and girls well known as Minors of the ABC. The films themselves were a mix of cartoons, serials with cliffhanger endings and wholesome adventures, Flash Gordon, Ivanhoe, Tarzan, Cowboys and Indians, Superman. The atmosphere was electric, children shouting at the screen, booing the villains, cheering the heroes. It was chaotic and joyful and entirely unsupervised beyond a few harassed ushers trying to maintain some semblance of order. Your parents would drop you off, knowing you'd be safe, knowing you'd be entertained for a few hours while they went shopping or had a cup of tea in peace. The cinema was dark and smelled of dust and old velvet and stale popcorn, and the beam of light from the projector was magical, full of dancing dust motes. Today, children watch films at home on massive televisions or on tablets in their bedrooms, the experience solitary and on demand. Back then, Saturday morning, pictures was communal, rowdy, an adventure in itself, and the walk home afterwards was filled with reenacting the scenes you just watched, imagining yourself as the hero. Number 10, the distinctive smell and feel of a doctor's waiting room. Going to the doctor in the 1960s was a serious affair, not something done lightly. You'd sit in a waiting room that always seemed the same, regardless of which surgery you attended. Uncomfortable wooden chairs lined the walls. A small electric fire glowed in one corner, barely making a dent in the chill. There were old magazines, years out of date, and perhaps a faded poster about coughs and sneezes spreading diseases. The smell was distinctive, antiseptic, floor polish, and something else, something vaguely medicinal that you couldn't quite identify. You'd wait in silence. People didn't chat. They'd cough discreetly behind their hands or stare at the floor or flick through those ancient magazines without really seeing them. There was no receptionist calling your name. Instead, a light would come on outside the doctor's door, or the door would simply open, and the previous patient would emerge, and you'd know it was your turn. The doctor himself was a figure of immense authority, usually male, often middle-aged or elderly, wearing a dark suit and tie beneath his white coat. He'd listen to your chest with a cold stethoscope, press your stomach, look down your throat with a wooden stick, all while barely making eye contact. Questioning his diagnosis was unthinkable. If he said you needed medicine, you took medicine. If he said it was nothing, you went home reassured, even if you still felt dreadful. Today we have appointments booked online, waiting rooms with toys and fish tanks, doctors who are younger, more diverse, who explain things and discuss options. Back then, the doctor was like a priest, and you accepted his judgment with gratitude and a sense that you'd been seen officially by someone who knew. Number 9, the taste of school dinners, especially the puddings. School dinners in the 1960s were substantial, hot, and served on thick white plates in a dining hall that smelled of boiled vegetables and gravy. The meals followed a reliable pattern. Monday might be shepherd's pie. Tuesday, liver and onions. Wednesday, perhaps a stew. Friday, inevitably, was fish, marking the Catholic tradition that had seeped into the culture. The food was nutritious in a post-war, make sure children get enough calories kind of way, but it wasn't always pleasant. Vegetables were boiled to within an inch of their lives, gray-green and mushy. Meat was often gristly, swimming in thin gravy. But the puddings made up for everything. Sponge pudding with custard, thick and yellow and sweet. Jam roly-poly, spotted dick. Treacle tart. Apple crumble. Chocolate concrete, a dense cake-like substance that lived up to its name. The puddings were the reward for finishing your main course, and dinner ladies patrolled the tables, ensuring you'd cleaned your plate before you could have dessert. If you didn't eat your liver, you didn't get your sponge and custard, and that was that. The dining hall was noisy, full of scraping cutlery and children's voices, and you sat on long benches at tables that seated 8 or 10. Prefects or older children would help serve, carrying huge metal trays. Today, school dinners come with choices, with salad bars and cultural diversity and considerations for allergies and preferences. Back then, you ate what you were given, and you were grateful for it, because food was still just about, remembered as something that had once been scarce. Number 8. The thrill and terror of bonfire night and the sheer power of fireworks that would never be legal today. Bonfire night, the 5th of November, was darker and more dangerous than anything we'd permit now. Families would build bonfires in back gardens or on waste ground, huge, towering structures of wood and old furniture that had been collected for weeks. The guy, a stuffed effigy of Guy Fawkes, would sit on top, destined to burn. At dusk, the fire would be lit, and the flames would leap high, crackling and spitting, showering sparks into the night sky. And then came the fireworks. Not the tame, controlled displays of today, but proper fireworks, powerful and unpredictable. Bangers that you held in your hand before throwing, Roman candles that shot stars into the air, Catherine wheels nailed to fence posts that spun with a screaming whistle, air bombs that exploded with a force you could feel in your chest. There were accidents, of course there were, burnt fingers, singed hair, the occasional trip to casualty, but it was accepted as part of the night's excitement. Parents would stand close to the fire with a drink, often something warming, while children ran about with sparklers, drawing patterns in the air, the metal wires glowing white-hot. The smell was unforgettable. Burning wood, cordite from the fireworks, toffee apples, and parkin if you were lucky. The night felt wild, barely controlled, a sanctioned moment of chaos. Today, bonfire night is professional displays, organized events, rules about safety distances, and who can purchase fireworks. Back then, it was genuine, visceral, and the next morning you'd survey the scorched grass and the debris with a sense of satisfaction that something real, something primal, had happened. Number 7. The formality of Sunday tea and the ritual of setting the table properly. Sunday tea was an occasion, not just a meal. It happened in the late afternoon, after the roast dinner had been eaten and cleared away, after the washing up, after a suitable period of digestion and rest. The table would be set properly, with a cloth, not a plastic wipeable one, but a real fabric cloth that had to be ironed. There would be proper cups and saucers, not mugs, and a teapot warming under a knitted cozy. The food was specific to Sunday tea: sandwiches with the crusts cut off, cucumber, egg and cress, ham, salmon paste, a sponge cake, or perhaps a Victoria sandwich dusted with icing sugar, tinned fruit and evaporated milk, bread and butter, sometimes a trifle if it was a special occasion. Everything was arranged neatly, and there was an order to proceedings. You'd wait to be offered things rather than grabbing. You'd pass plates politely. You'd use a napkin. The tea itself was strong, brewed in the pot, milk added from a jug, sugar from a bowl with a spoon, not packets. The ritual of it was important, this sense that Sunday was different, that even tea required standards and attention. The conversation would be gentler than at other meals, perhaps talk of the week ahead, or neighbors, or something seen on television. Today we eat when we're hungry, often standing up, often alone, often something grabbed from the fridge and eaten quickly. The idea of setting a table properly for tea seems quaint, performative, something from a period drama. Back then, it was a marker of respectability, a way of maintaining standards in a world that was rapidly changing. Number 6. The absolute terror of the school dentist and the distinctive drill. Dental care in schools was provided by the NHS. which sounds wonderful until you remember what those visits actually entailed. You'd be called out of class, your name on a list, and you'd walk down unfamiliar corridors to a room that had been temporarily converted into a dental surgery. Sometimes it was a mobile unit, a caravan parked in the playground. The dentist's chair was intimidating, more like a piece of industrial equipment than furniture. The dentist, often wearing a white coat that seemed slightly grubby, would peer into your mouth with a small mirror and that sharp-pointed tool that always seemed to find the exact spot that made you wince. And then, if you had a cavity, came the drill. That drill, that terrible drill, made a high-pitched whining sound that penetrated your skull. There was no injection for small fillings, or at least not routinely. You were expected to grip the armrests and endure it, the sensation of grinding, the smell of burning tooth, the taste of metal. If you cried, you were made to feel you'd let the side down, that braver children than you had sat through worse without a fuss. When it was over, you'd be dismissed, possibly with a slight numbness, if you'd been fortunate enough to receive an injection, your mouth sore, your nerves rattled. Today, pediatric dentists have colorful rooms, television screens on the ceiling, gentle voices, and numbing gel before injections. Back then, the school dentist was something to be feared, and the memory of that drill is something anyone who experienced it will carry forever. Number 5. The distinctive sound and smell of a red telephone box and the ritual of making a call. Public telephone boxes, those iconic red ones, were everywhere in the 1960s, standing on street corners like small monuments to communication. Making a call from one was a procedure. You'd step inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind you, and immediately you'd be hit by the smell. Cigarette smoke, stale air, sometimes a faint odor of urine, and that peculiar metallic telephone smell. The floor would be littered with cigarette ends and perhaps torn fragments of directories. You'd lift the heavy black receiver, listening for the dial tone, and then you'd press button A or button B, depending on whether you were placing a call or trying to retrieve your coins from a failed attempt. The dial itself required commitment, your finger in the hole, pulling it round clockwise, waiting for it to return before dialing the next number. If you were calling long distance, you'd feed in shillings, the coins clanking down inside the mechanism. The line was often crackly, echoing, and you'd have to speak loudly to be heard. There was a vulnerability to it, standing in that glass box, your conversation theoretically private, but somehow feeling exposed. Families without home phones, and there were many, relied on these boxes for important calls. You'd arrange to call at a specific time, waiting by the phone box, hoping no one else got there first. Today we have phones in our pockets, constant connectivity, video calls at the touch of a screen. Back then, speaking to someone who wasn't physically present required planning, coins, and a willingness to stand in a small glass box that smelled of other people's breath and smoke. Number 4. The excitement of Christmas and the single present under the tree. Christmas in the 1960s was simpler, smaller, but somehow more intense for it. Preparations would begin weeks in advance, but decorations didn't go up until mid-December at the earliest. The tree was real, usually a modest size, and it would be decorated with glass baubles, tinsel that was made of actual foil and tarnished if you touched it with wet hands, and lights that had to be tested bulb by bulb, because if one failed, they all went out. Presents were modest. Most children would receive one main present, something significant they'd ask for. A bicycle, a doll, a train set, a book. Perhaps a few smaller gifts, an orange, some nuts, a selection box of chocolates. The wrapping paper was reused, carefully folded, and saved for next year. Christmas morning had a magic to it that's hard to describe. You'd wake in the dark, too excited to sleep, and creep downstairs to see if Father Christmas had been. The stocking, an actual stocking hung by the fireplace, would be lumpy with small gifts, a coloring book, a toy car, a spinning top, a bar of chocolate. The main presents would be under the tree, and the anticipation of opening them was almost unbearable. But you'd wait. You'd wait until your parents woke, until breakfast was eaten, until the proper time. The day itself followed a pattern: church in the morning for many families, then dinner at midday, turkey or goose, roast potatoes, Brussels sprouts, Christmas pudding with sixpences hidden inside, and white sauce. The Queen's speech at 3 o'clock, watched in respectful silence. Board games in the evening, nuts and tangerines, perhaps a nip of sherry for the adults. Today, Christmas begins in October, presents are piled high, children have lists of demands fulfilled by Amazon deliveries. Back then, less was more, and the single present under the tree carried the weight of all your hopes. Number 3. The freedom and independence of childhood and being outside until the streetlights came on. Children in the 1960s had a freedom that would horrify modern parents. From the age of 5 or 6, you'd be sent outside to play, and you wouldn't be expected home until tea time or until the streetlights flickered on, whichever came first. There were no mobile phones, no way of contacting you. Your parents didn't know exactly where you were, and that was normal. You'd roam the streets, the parks, the waste ground at the edge of town. You'd build dens, climb trees, dam streams, explore derelict buildings. You'd play football in the street, chalking goalposts on walls, scattering when a car approached. You'd knock on friends' doors to see if they could come out, and if they couldn't, you'd move on to the next house. The world felt vast and yours to explore, bounded only by the understood limits of your neighborhood and the requirement to be home when called. There were dangers, of course: strangers with sweets, busy roads, ponds and canals. But the prevailing philosophy was that children needed to learn independence, to take risks, to develop common sense through experience. You'd fall, scrape your knees, learn not to do that again. You'd get into minor scrapes and learn how to get out of them. Parents didn't hover, didn't schedule every hour, didn't drive you from activity to activity. They let you go, trusting that you'd come back, and mostly you did, muddy and hungry and full of the day's adventures. Today, we have playdates, supervised activities, tracking apps, and the idea of a 6-year-old playing unsupervised in the street is unthinkable. Back then, it was childhood, and the independence you felt, the ownership of your own time and space, was formative in ways we're only now beginning to understand we might have lost. Number 2. The smell and warmth of a coal fire and the ritual of keeping it burning. Central heating was rare. Most homes had a single coal fire in the living room, and that fire was the heart of the house. The coal would be delivered, great sacks of it, tipped into the coal bunker, by a man whose face and hands were perpetually blackened. Keeping the fire going was a daily task, almost a ceremony. In the morning, someone would rake out the ashes from the night before, laying them carefully in the ash bucket, to be disposed of later. Then you'd scrunch up newspaper, lay kindling, add a few pieces of coal, and light it, watching anxiously as the paper caught, hoping the kindling would take, that the coal would begin to glow. Once it was going, you'd add more coal carefully, too much, and you'd smother it, too little, and it would die out. The fire required attention throughout the day, poking with the brass poker to let air through, adding coal piece by piece. The warmth was intense but localized. You'd sit close to the fire, face hot, back cold, and everyone would cluster around it in the evening. There was something hypnotic about watching the flames, the way coal burns blue and orange, the occasional crack and spit as gases escaped. The smell permeated everything, a smoky, slightly acrid scent that clung to clothes and hair. The fire was functional, but also beautiful, a living thing that demanded care and gave comfort in return. Today we turn a thermostat, press a button, and warmth appears instantly and evenly throughout the house. Back then, warmth was earned, tended, a daily negotiation with coal and air and flame, and there was a satisfaction to it, a connection to basic human needs that we've lost in our automated world. Number 1. the absolute silence of the world before constant background noise. This is perhaps the most profound difference, the hardest to explain to anyone who didn't experience it. The world was quieter, profoundly, noticeably quieter. There was no hum of technology, no constant buzz of devices, no notifications, no traffic rumble at all hours, fewer cars, fewer planes, fewer machines. When you walked down a suburban street, you could hear birds singing, hear your own footsteps, hear the wind in the trees. At night, the silence was almost complete, broken only by natural sounds or the distant bark of a dog, the occasional passing car. You could hear your own thoughts. Concentration came more easily because there was nothing competing for your attention, no ambient noise seeping into your consciousness. Radios were turned on deliberately, listened to, then turned off. Televisions the same. Record players were occasional, not constant background music. Conversations happened in real quiet, not shouted over the television or conducted while someone scrolled through their phone. The silence allowed for boredom, which sounds negative, but was actually generative. Boredom led to reading, to imagination, to making your own entertainment. It allowed for reflection, for daydreaming, for the kind of internal mental space that's increasingly rare. Today we're bombarded by sound from the moment we wake until we sleep. Notifications, traffic, leaf blowers, constant music in shops and cafes, the expectation of being reachable at all times. We've become afraid of silence, filling every gap with podcasts or music or the television in the background. Back then, silence was normal, and within that silence was a kind of peace, a mental spaciousness that we've traded for constant connection and constant noise. Those who remember it feel its loss most keenly, that deep, sustaining quiet that allowed the world to speak in whispers rather than shouts. These weren't just memories. They were a way of life, a texture to existence that has been smoothed away by progress and prosperity and the relentless march of modernity. The 1960s in Britain were a bridge, suspended between the hardships of the post-war years and the affluence that was just beginning to arrive. Life was harder in many ways, colder, more constrained, less comfortable. But it was also slower, more connected, more rooted in place and community. Childhood had freedom that came with scraped knees and lessons learned through experience. Adulthood had certainties, structures, a sense of how things were done that everyone seemed to understand. The smells were sharper, the tastes more distinctive, the sounds more individual. Every experience had weight, because experiences were rarer, more deliberate, less disposable. We've gained so much since then: warmth, comfort, convenience, choice, connection to the wider world, freedoms that previous generations could barely imagine. But we've lost something too, something harder to quantify, but no less real. The slowness, the patience, the acceptance of limitation, the deep, sustaining silence, the sense that some things were worth waiting for, that scarcity made things precious, that not everything could or should be instant. Those who grew up in 1960s Britain carry these memories like treasures, or perhaps like ghosts, reminders of a world that no longer exists except in the peculiar alchemy of recollection, where a smell or a sound or a taste can transport you back across decades to a time when life was simpler, harder, stranger, and somehow more vivid than anything we know today.